A small hand clamped around his fingers and squeezed. Hard, harder than a child should be able to squeeze. He looked down. A little girl stood pressed against his leg, shaking. Her eyes were locked on something across the room. "Please," she whispered, "pretend you're my dad." He didn't move. Two men stood by the far wall, watching her, watching him. One of them took a step forward. The dog at his feet rose, ears flat, a low sound building in its chest. The man stopped. The girl's whole body was trembling against his knee. He knelt down slow, put one arm around her and said the only word that mattered: "Sweetheart." His name was Caleb Marsh. 20 years a Navy SEAL, and he had never felt his heart move like this. What those two men wanted with a 6-year-old would break your heart. Stay with me on this one. Now Caleb Marsh was not a man who got surprised easily. 2 decades had taught him to read a room before he stepped into it. Who was armed, who was scared, who was lying. He could walk into a place and know inside 3 seconds where the trouble was. And when that little hand grabbed his, he already knew. The trouble was the two men by the wall. He was 51 now, retired. His knees ached when it rained, and his left shoulder didn't lift the way it used to. He'd been sitting on a hard plastic bench in the San Diego bus terminal for the better part of an hour, waiting out a layover, a paper cup of bad coffee going cold in his hand. He wasn't going anywhere important, just up the coast to see his sister for a few days. The dog. Let me tell you about the dog because he matters. Ranger was a German Shepherd, and he was old too. Gray had crept into his muzzle, and a long scar ran from his ear down his neck where the fur never grew back right. He'd taken shrapnel overseas that Caleb still didn't talk about, and he'd pulled 2 men out of a collapsed doorway that day, dragging them by their collars while the walls came down. He'd been Caleb's partner then, and he was Caleb's partner now. They'd grown old together the way soldiers do, slower, quieter, but never once losing the thing inside that made them look up when something was wrong, and something was wrong. Caleb kept his voice easy. He smiled at the girl like she was his own. "There you are," he said, loud enough to carry. "I was wondering where you ran off to." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Brown hair, tangled like nobody had brushed it in days. Her jacket was too thin. Her shoes were the kind of pink sneakers that light up when you walk, except one of them had stopped lighting up a long time ago. "Good girl," he murmured, so soft only she could hear. "Just stand right here with me. Nobody's going to touch you." She nodded against his shoulder. He felt her heartbeat going a mile a minute like a bird you cup in your hands. He looked back at the 2 men. And this is where his stomach went cold because these were not amateurs. The first one was big. Military big, thick through the neck, a crew cut going gray at the sides, a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset more than once. He stood with his weight balanced, hands loose, watching Caleb the way one professional watches another. The second man was smaller, younger, wearing a windbreaker zipped up to the throat on a warm day. And you don't zip a jacket like that in Southern California unless you've got something under it you don't want people to see. Caleb had seen a lot of bad men. Some wore uniforms, some wore suits. These 2 wore nothing that said anything, and that told him plenty. These were men who did quiet work, the kind that leaves no witnesses. "Sweetheart," Caleb said, still smiling, "can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Emma. That's a beautiful name." He shifted so his body was between her and the 2 men. Ranger read the movement and shifted too, planting himself in front of the girl's legs, facing out. The old dog didn't bark. Barking is noise. Ranger just stared at the big man with those flat amber eyes, and a sound came out of him low and steady like an engine idling. The big man's eyes dropped to the dog, just for a second, but Caleb caught it. Even a hard man thinks twice about a dog that isn't afraid of him. "Emma," Caleb said, "those 2 men, you know them." She shook her head hard. "They got off the bus after me." I sat by the window and they were 3 seats back, and every time I looked they were looking at me. Her voice cracked. My mommy said if I was ever scared, find a soldier, somebody like Daddy, and I saw your hat. Caleb touched the bill of the cap on his head. A faded blue ball cap with a gold trident stitched on the front, the Navy SEAL insignia. He'd worn it so long he'd forgotten it was there. Your daddy's a soldier. She didn't answer. Her chin trembled and she looked down at her broken shoes. Caleb didn't push. 20 years had taught him you don't get everything at once. You get people to say first. You ask the rest later. Right now what he needed was distance, eyes on the exits, and a way to move a 6-year-old across a crowded terminal without turning it into a chase. Here's the thing about a bus station. It's the last place in America where nobody's really watching anybody. People are tired, broke, half asleep, waiting on a bus that's 40 minutes late. 2 men could walk a little girl right out the front doors and 40 people would look up and think family. That's what makes a place like that dangerous, not the shadows. The indifference. Caleb stood up slow, keeping Emma's hand in his, Ranger between them. His knee popped. He ignored it. At the far end of the terminal, a transit authority officer leaned against a pillar, thumbing through his phone, bored out of his mind. Good. But it was 50 feet of open floor away, and the 2 men were closer than that. The big man said something to the younger one without moving his lips, and the younger one started walking. Slow, casual, cutting an angle toward them like he had all the time in the world. Emma, Caleb said quietly, how old are you? 6. Okay, 6. That's a big girl. I need you to do something big girl brave for me. Can you do that? She looked up at him. And I want you to picture this because it's the whole story right here. This child, terrified, alone, small enough that the top of her head didn't reach his belt buckle, looked up into the face of a total stranger and decided to trust him with her life. Because he had a hat with a gold bird on it. Because a mother somewhere had told her that men like that keep their word. Yes, Emma said, and Caleb Marsh made her a promise he had no idea how he was going to keep. Then stay right by me, he said, and no matter what happens, don't let go of my hand. The younger man kept coming. He had a smile on his face now, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and he lifted one hand in a little wave like he was somebody's uncle come to collect his niece. Hey there, the man called out, pleasant as could be. Emma, sweetheart, come on. Your mom's waiting in the car. We talked about this. And that was the moment Caleb knew exactly what kind of trouble had walked into that station. Because he had never told these men her name. But this one knew it. Now the smart play is to make a scene. A predator wants quiet. He wants you to come along peaceful so nobody looks twice. So the very worst thing you can do to a man like that is get loud. Caleb got loud. That's far enough, he said, and his voice cut across the terminal like a blade. Heads turned. The transit officer looked up. This man is trying to take a child that isn't his. The younger man's smile flickered. Then it came back wider and he spread his hands and laughed, an easy, aw shucks laugh aimed at the people now watching. Whoa, buddy, hey, big misunderstanding, that's my brother's kid. She wandered off, she gets scared, it happens. He looked at the crowd. Come on, Emma, tell the man I'm your Uncle Rick. Every eye in that station swung down to the little girl. Emma pressed her face into Caleb's side and screamed, He's not my uncle. I don't know him. I don't know him. And Ranger came off the floor. He didn't attack. Caleb hadn't given the word, and Ranger, old as he was still a soldier who waited for the word. But he stepped forward and put himself square between the girl and the man in the windbreaker, and he showed his teeth, and the growl turned into something that made 2 women nearby grab their bags and back away. Rick stopped short. His hand twitched toward the zipper of his jacket. And Caleb, who had spent 20 years watching men reach for things under jackets, moved Emma behind his back in one smooth motion and said, in a voice gone very flat and very calm, "You do not want to open that jacket in front of 40 witnesses and a police officer. Think, son. Think hard." The transit officer was walking over now, hand on his radio. "What's going on here?" For a second nobody moved. The station held its breath. Then the big man gave a small shake of his head, and just like that the two of them turned and walked. Not running. Walking unhurried out through the glass doors into the white morning light and gone. Like they'd never been there at all. The officer reached them, breathing a little hard. "Sir, you want to tell me what that was?" And Caleb looked down at the little girl still clutching 2 fingers of his hand in her fist, and he let out a long breath, and for one foolish moment he thought the hard part was over. It wasn't. It was just getting started. The officer's name was Delgado, and he was young and he was decent, which counts for a lot. He took them to a back office and got Emma a bottle of water and a package of little cookies, and she ate them the way a child eats who hasn't eaten much lately, fast and quiet, both hands around the bottle. Caleb sat across from her and let Ranger rest his big scarred head on the girl's knee. She stroked the dog's ears, and something in her shoulders came down an inch. That's when Caleb finally started to breathe himself. Delgado ran the men's descriptions over the radio, told Caleb a detective was on the way, that he'd done a real good thing and to sit tight. Sit tight. Caleb almost laughed. He drank half his own water in one pull and thought, all right, she's safe. They're gone. The police are coming. I'll give my statement, they'll find her mother, and this'll be a story I tell my sister tonight. Emma finished her cookies. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. And she looked at Caleb, calmer now, and said, "Are you really a soldier, like my daddy?" "I was," Caleb said, "a long time." "What kind of soldier was your daddy?" She reached into the pocket of her thin jacket and pulled out a photograph, soft and creased from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times, and she slid it across the table to him. "That's him," she said. "Mommy said he watches me from heaven." Caleb picked up the photograph, and the room went out from under him, because he knew that face. He knew it the way you know your own brother's face. The young man in the photo was in desert fatigues, squinting into a hard sun, one arm slung around the shoulders of the man beside him, both grinning like fools. And the man beside him, younger, whole, both shoulders working fine, was Caleb Marsh. The name came up out of somewhere deep and old, and it hurt on the way out. "Danny," he said. "Danny Reyes." Emma's eyes went wide. "You knew my daddy." Caleb couldn't speak. His throat had closed. He was looking at Danny Reyes, 26 years old, alive, laughing in the sun, and he was hearing the last thing Danny ever said to him, over the radio, over the noise of a very bad night 11 years ago. "Take care of them for me, Cal. Promise me." And Caleb had said, "I promise, brother," and 40 seconds later the transmission cut out and Danny Reyes did not come home. Caleb had gone to the funeral. He'd stood in the back because he couldn't stand up close. There'd been a wife, he remembered. Young, pregnant. He'd meant to reach out. He told himself he would when things settled, when he got his own head straight. And the months turned into years, and the guilt got so heavy he couldn't lift the phone, and he told himself the family was better off not being reminded, and he let a promise to a dying man rot inside him like a wound that never got clean. This was that pregnant wife's baby. This was Danny's daughter. Alone, hunted, holding a bottle of water in 2 small hands. And out of every stranger in that terminal, she had walked up to the one man on earth who had sworn to her father that he would keep her safe. "Emma," he said, and his voice was not steady anymore, and he didn't try to make it steady. "Yeah, I knew your daddy. He was my best friend in the whole world." The door opened before she could answer. Delgado leaned in, and his face was tighter now. "Mr. Marsh, the detective's here, and there's something you need to hear." He glanced at Emma, then lowered his voice. "It's about the girl's mother." Here is what the detective told him, out in the hallway, with the door pulled shut so Emma couldn't hear. Her name was Akaffer, maybe 40, sharp-eyed, and she didn't waste words. She'd run the girl's photograph and Danny Reyes's name, and the picture that came back was ugly. After Danny died, his widow, a woman named Sarah, had done all right for a while on the survivor's benefits. Then she'd met a man. His name was Victor Hale, and Victor Hale ran money for people you did not want to run money for. He'd moved Sarah and the baby into a nice house and put nice things around them, and by the time Sarah understood what he really was, she was in too deep to walk out the front door. 3 weeks ago, she'd tried anyway. She'd taken Emma and run. She got as far as a shelter in Barstow, Akaffer said, called a hotline 2 days ago, said Hale had people looking for her, said he told her that no matter where she went, she belonged to him and the kid belonged to him and there was no such thing as leaving. Her jaw tightened. The shelter put her and the girl on a bus. Standard protocol, get distance, split them if you have to. Somewhere along the line, Hale's people picked up the trail. "The 2 men, Caleb said. "The 2 men. We think Hale put Sarah on one bus and the girl slipped onto another. Maybe the mother told her to." Akaffer looked at him steadily. "We don't know where the mother is right now, and those 2 men are still out there. Hale doesn't want the woman, he wants the child. Because as long as he has the child, the mother comes back on her own. Every time." Caleb stood in that hallway and felt 11 years of buried guilt crack open and pour out through his chest. His fault. He'd known there was a widow. He'd known there was a baby. He'd promised. And he'd let a coward's silence keep him away while Danny Reyes's little girl fell into the hands of a man like Victor Hale. "Where do you think the mother is?" he said. Akaffer shook her head. "We're working it. But right now my job is that child in there, and the safest thing for her is protective custody until we sort this out. Child Services is sending someone." And Caleb Marsh, who had stayed calm through the whole thing, felt something rise up in him that 11 years of silence had been waiting to say. "No," he said. "Now let me stop here for 1 second, because if you're still with me, if this little girl and this old soldier have gotten into you the way they got into me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one deserve to be told all the way to the end. All right, back to it. Because this is where Caleb Marsh stopped being a bystander." "No," he said again. "Not a stranger, not a stranger's house full of other scared kids. Not tonight." Akaffer folded her arms. "Sir, with respect, you found this child 40 minutes ago." "I've known this child her whole life," Caleb said. "I just didn't know it until 40 minutes ago." He pulled out his wallet, dug behind his own driver's license, and slid something free. A photograph older even than Emma's, the colors going yellow. 2 young men in desert fatigues, grinning, one arm slung over the other's shoulders. The exact same photograph the little girl carried in her pocket. The same day. The same sun. Just Caleb's copy. Akaffer took it, looked at it a long moment. Looked at him. "His name was Danny Reyes," Caleb said. "He died with my hand on his vest telling me to take care of his family. That's her father. And I let 11 years go by. I am not letting 1 more hour go by. Fingerprint me. Call the Navy. Call anyone. But that little girl does not spend tonight with someone who doesn't know her daddy's name." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere a bus arrival crackled over the speakers, and Detective Akaffer, who had a daughter of her own at home, looked at that old photograph one more time and made a decision that was probably against a dozen rules. "We'll run it," she said. "Every check, tonight, and you don't leave my sight until we do." She handed the photo back. "But Mr. Marsh, understand me. Hale is not going to stop. Getting the girl into a police station is the easy part. Keeping her is the war." Caleb slid the photograph back into his wallet next to his heart, where it had ridden for 11 years. "Ma'am," he said, "I have never in my life lost a war I was willing to die in." They didn't make it to the station without one. The plan was simple. Akafar's unmarked car out back, Emma and the dog in the seat, Caleb up front, straight to a downtown precinct where there were walls and cameras and armed officers. Delgado would ride behind them in a marked cruiser. 10 minutes, tops. They got Emma bundled into a real jacket somebody found her, and Caleb carried her out the back because her legs were tired and because he wasn't setting her down. Ranger walked at his knee, that gray head swinging side to side, reading everything. The back lot was half empty, buses idling, heat shimmering off the concrete. Caleb saw the wrongness before he heard anything. A delivery van parked where no delivery van should be, nose out, engine running. A man behind the wheel not looking at his phone the way a man kills time. He was looking at the door they'd just come out of. "Detective," Caleb said low, 10 o'clock the van." Akafar's hand went to her hip, and that's when the side door of the van slid open, and the big man with the gray crew cut stepped out, and this time there was a gun in his hand, held down along his leg where the cameras out front would never see it. "Just the kid," the big man called across the lot, almost bored. "Nobody else has to have a bad day. Hand over the kid, everybody goes home." Everything happened in about 6 seconds. Caleb turned his body, putting himself and his back squarely between Emma and the gun, so that if the man fired, the round went through Caleb Marsh first. He set the girl down behind a concrete pillar and said one word, "Quiet," a word Ranger had been waiting 11 years to hear again. "Go." And that old, scarred, gray-muzzled dog crossed 40 feet of concrete faster than anything his age had a right to. The big man swung the gun toward the blur coming at him and got off one wild shot that cracked off the pavement, and then 80 pounds of German Shepherd hit him at the wrist and took him off his feet. The gun skittered under the van. The man screamed. Ranger did not let go. Rick came around the front of the van with a knife, and he made it 3 steps before Caleb Marsh was on him. "I want you to understand something." Caleb was 51. His knees were shot and his shoulder didn't lift right. But there's a thing that lives in men like him, put there by 20 years and 100 bad nights, and it does not retire. It just sleeps. The knife came up and Caleb didn't back away from it. He stepped into it, caught the wrist, turned it the wrong way with a crack that echoed off the concrete, and put the man face first into the side of the van hard enough to leave a dent. The knife rang on the ground. Rick went down and stayed down, cradling his arm and making a high, thin sound. "Police." Nobody move. Akafar had her weapon up. Delgado threw the door behind her with his own gun drawn, and just like that the 6 seconds were over and it was done. The big man was on his back with Ranger's jaws locked on his forearm and Ranger's paws on his chest, and every time he twitched the dog growled deeper, and the man had gone very still and very smart. Caleb walked over, picked the gun up off the ground with 2 fingers by the barrel, and handed it to Delgado. "Ranger," he said, "off." The dog let go and backed off 2 steps and sat, tongue out, tail thumping the concrete. 60 seconds of war and 11 years of retirement, and none of it had touched the thing that made him a soldier. They cuffed the 2 men against the van. And that should have been the whole of it. But Caleb crouched down next to the big man, the professional, and said, quiet just between them, "Where's her mother?" The man spat blood and said nothing. Caleb looked at him a long moment. "You've got a daughter's whole life on your hands, and you're going to spend 30 years in a cell thinking about how a bus station dog and a broke-down old man took you down in front of God and the cameras. But you can do one clean thing before they take you." He leaned closer. "Where is Sarah Reyes?" And something in the man, some last flicker of whatever he'd been before Victor Hale bought him, cracked. "Motel," he muttered. "Off the 8, the Sundowner. Hale's holding her there till we brought the kid." He looked away. "She fought us. She wouldn't stop fighting. That's why we needed the kid." Akaffer already had her radio up. Emma came out from behind the pillar. She walked past the cuffed men without looking at them, and she walked up to Ranger and put both arms around that big scarred neck and buried her face in his fur. And the old dog leaned into her, gentle as anything, and held still and let her cry. They found Sarah Reyes at the Sundowner Motel 40 minutes later, bruised, locked in a bathroom, alive. Victor Hale ran. He made it 2 states before a highway patrol trooper pulled him over for a broken tail light and ran his plate. And it turned out the empire Victor Hale had built on making people believe there was no such thing as leaving had a leaving of its own waiting at the end of it. He'd be a very long time in a place with no doors he could open. But that was later. That was paperwork in courtrooms and a story for another day. What I want to tell you about is the reunion, because I was told about it by someone who was there, and they said the whole precinct went quiet. They brought Sarah in through the front, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic at each elbow. She was thin and shaking, and she had 2 black eyes, and the second she came through those doors she was scanning the room, wild, desperate, and she couldn't find her. And then a small voice said, "Mommy." Sarah Reyes turned, and Emma broke away from Caleb's side and ran across that precinct floor, pink sneakers slapping the tile, one of them still not lighting up, and her mother went down on her knees and caught her and folded around her, and neither of them said a word that made any sense. They just made the sounds people make when the thing they were most afraid of losing is put back in their arms. Grown detectives turned around and looked at the ceiling. Delgado wiped his face with his sleeve and pretended he hadn't. Sarah looked up over her daughter's shoulder and found the old man standing back by the wall, hat in his hands, keeping his distance the way he always kept his distance. And she went still. "I know you," she said. "You were at Danny's funeral in the back." Her voice trembled. "He talked about you." All the time, Caleb, his brother Caleb, tears ran down through the bruises. "Emma found you in a whole city. She found you." Caleb's mouth worked, but nothing came out. 11 years. Every word he should have said and never did, standing right in front of him in the shape of a woman he'd let down and a child he'd never met. "I'm sorry," he finally managed. "I should have come. I promised him I'd take care of you, and I was a coward and I stayed away. And I have no excuse in this world, and I am so sorry." And Sarah Reyes, holding her daughter, beaten half to death by a man who told her there was no such thing as leaving, looked at Caleb Marsh and said the thing that undid him completely. "You did take care of us," she said. "You were exactly where she needed you to be. Danny always said you would be." She pressed her lips to Emma's hair. "You just got here a little late, but you got here." Caleb Marsh, 20 years a Navy SEAL, a man who had never let anyone see him cry, sat down on a bench in a downtown police precinct and put his face in his hands and wept. They did not go their separate ways after that. You probably already knew they wouldn't. It took a while. These things take a while. There were the courts and the statements and the slow machinery of a mother and child putting a life back together from nothing. Sarah and Emma had no home to go back to that wasn't tangled up in Victor Hale, so Caleb did the thing he should have done 11 years before. He brought them home. Not to keep, he told himself at first, just till they were steady. His sister up the coast had a spare cottage behind her house, and it sat empty, and now it didn't. Caleb never made it to his layover. His sister drove down instead, and when she heard the whole story, she just looked at her brother a long moment and said, "Well, it's about time you let something in." And she helped Sarah unpack a life that fit into 2 duffel bags. Emma started school that fall. She stopped waking up screaming somewhere around Christmas. Sarah found work at a veterinary clinic, which felt right to all of them, and some evenings Caleb would sit on the porch and watch the two of them come up the path, mother and daughter, laughing about something, and he'd have to look away for a second because his chest couldn't hold it. Ranger, old soldier that he was, appointed himself Emma's shadow. Where she went, he went. He slept across her bedroom door every night with that gray muzzle on his paws, and he did not so much as let the mail carry her up the walk without an escort. The scar on his neck and the ache in Caleb's shoulder, the two of them standing guard over the one thing they'd finally gotten right. Caleb never talked much about that day, but he kept two things in his wallet now, side by side. The old photograph of him and Danny grinning in the sun, and a new one, a crayon drawing folded small of a tall man and a little girl and a big gray dog, and over the top in careful, wobbly 6-year-old letters, the words MYFAMLY. He never fixed the spelling. He said it was perfect the way it was. A year after the bus station, on a gray morning by the water, Emma slipped her hand into his the way she had that first day. Except this time it wasn't fear. This time she just wanted to hold on. And she looked up at him and asked if she could call him something other than Caleb. He knelt down in front of her, that bad knee popping, Ranger settling into the sand beside them. "What did you have in mind, sweetheart?" And Emma Reyes, daughter of a soldier who watched her from heaven, looked at the soldier who was standing right there in front of her, and she told him. Caleb Marsh didn't answer for a moment. He couldn't. He just gathered her up and held on out there where the ocean kept doing the only thing it knows how to do, coming in and never once giving up on the shore. Somewhere, he thought, a young man was grinning in the sun. "Promise kept, brother," he said. "Better late than never." And the little hand squeezed his fingers hard, the way a child holds on to something she has decided she is never, ever going to let go of. The tightened script now runs 4,995 words inside the target. The 150-word hook is untouched. The false calm trigger beat at the office to parking lot turn is intact. The CTA still lands right after the no payoff, and the closing beach scene and final line are preserved word for word. Cuts came from trimming redundant phrasing and a few atmosphere lines, not from removing any story beat.